So my name's Anthony KJ Smith. I'm the postgraduate portfolio leader for the Australian Sociological Association. So today's session is on navigating the supervision relationship. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where I live. So I'm on the unceded Bedegal country in Warrung or Sydney, and I acknowledge elders past and present of this country. I'd also like to acknowledge all Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who might be attending today. So this event will be a panel discussion, and we've got two panelists, and then we'll have an open Q&A. So the event will be recorded and put on YouTube. And if you have any questions as we're going along, you can write them in the chat and we might address them as we're sort of talking, or we'll address them when we get to the Q&A, or when we get to the Q&A, you can pop on video and unmute and ask your question. So I'd like to just also thank two members of the postgraduate subcommittee, Dorinda Tahar and Jane Jin, and also thank Sally Daly for helping to prepare for today's TASA Thursday. For those who haven't joined us before, the Postgrad and ECR TASA Thursdays are developed by the TASA Postgraduate Subcommittee and are aimed at trying to demystify and explore academic processes and topics related to sociological work. So for today's session, as I said, we're discussing navigating the supervision relationship. And this relationship is a central set of relationships. And having spoken to academics at all stages of their career, it's a relationship that I think can really make or break the experience of doing a higher degree research degree. So whether that's a PhD or master's by research or honours. So with that said, the aim of today's session is to explore this relationship and to think about how it can best be negotiated. We won't necessarily have all the answers, but I hope it's useful. And we have two fantastic scholars to share their perspectives today, who I'll now introduce. So we have Dr. Kiran Pienaar, who's a lecturer in sociology at Deakin University. Kiran's research interests include the sociology of health, gender, and sexuality, and she's published on topics related to queer identities and cultures, the biopolitics of disease and drugs, addiction, and the self. She's the author of the book Politics in the Making of HIV/AIDS in South Africa. And Helen Keane is a professor of sociology at the Australian National University. She has supervised PhDs in sociology and gender studies and has examined theses for universities in Australia and overseas. Helen's research focuses on drug use and critical public health, and she's the author of Habits, Remaking Addiction with Suzanne Fraser and David Moore. She's also interested in pedagogy and the challenges of undergraduate education. So thanks for joining us today. So I want to start, I mean, this might seem like an obvious question, but it's worth stepping back and thinking about it. What is a supervisor and what kind of relationship is it? I don't know who wants to try that.
Shall I start? Kiran?
Yeah, go for it, Helen.
Okay, thank you very much, Anthony. And I just want to say thanks for everyone who's joined, and just to acknowledge that I'm joining from the beautiful lands of the Ngunnawal people. So what kind of relationship with it is it? Well, I've got two sort of contradictory responses to that. One is to say that it's a very unique relationship. It's got a specific institutional context and a specific goal. And that's why I'm a little bit wary of some of the analogies that are used to talk about this. And I think one of the analogies is student-teacher, and I think that's somewhat problematic. And I was reflecting on this because when I was thinking about my responses to these questions, I realized that I do use the term student to refer to HDR researchers, and I think that's actually not great, but I tried to use the word candidate instead, and that sounded too formal. So I will probably keep saying student, but I actually think that the category of the student in this context is a bit problematic. So on one hand, it's a unique relationship. On the other hand, I do think it has features that are true of all human relationships, in that people bring their kind of anxieties and unconscious desires and habitual responses to the relationship. So that's my answer to that one. How about you, Kiran?
Thanks, Helen. Thanks for kicking us off. And thank you to Anthony for the invitation. And I'd also just like to acknowledge that I'm joining from Wurundjeri country, and I'm on the land of the Kulin Nation. And I'm really I'm thrilled to be here and be able to have this discussion with Helen, because I should say that I'm pretty new to supervision and I'm still discovering my supervision style. So a little bit selfishly, I'm keen to hear from Helen as well and to benefit from her insights as a seasoned supervisor. But I know that Anthony wanted supervisors at varying levels or with varying levels of experience to reflect on navigating the relationship. So I guess with that caveat in mind, that's where I'm coming from. And I guess like Helen, I see it as a kind of a mentoring relationship, a research mentoring relationship, but one that takes different forms across the HDR journey, and that depends on the student and the supervisor dynamic. And I reflecting on my own experience, both as a supervisor and as an HDR student, or as Helen was saying, candidate or researcher in training maybe, I think a supervisor can be, and this is where for me it's really exciting, an intellectual interlocutor. Someone to dialogue with about exciting new ideas, theoretical and intellectual challenges you might be grappling with. And for me, that's what I find most exciting as a supervisor. I think we get to discuss cutting edge new scholarly developments with researchers, and it can push our thinking in new directions. But on the flip side, I sometimes find myself being a bit of a cheerleader. I don't know if Helen feels this. So encouraging and supporting students. I know we all have doubts, and sometimes you just need someone to say you can do it. Sometimes it's about advising students or researchers on their options when things are difficult. So there is a kind of pastoral element of care. And I don't think this dimension is acknowledged in institutional structures, but I'm going to put it out there because I think it's important. As Helen said, we're humans in this relationship. But on the flip side, I think a good supervisor is also a firm guide. And that means sometimes giving critical, constructive feedback, sometimes telling students things that might be hard to hear, and steering them with a firm but supportive hand. So, of course, supervisors work in teams. So one person might not fulfill all these roles, but hopefully on a panel, you might have someone who's kind of the bad cop and the good cop, if you want to put it in those binary terms. But, you know, supervisors playing different but complementary roles. And for me personally, I find co-supervision really rewarding for this reason. So yeah, I guess that would be my response to that question, Anthony.
It's interesting the thinking about just the sort of differences in different countries, even because Helen signaled there about the ambiguity of that kind of student, like even calling it a student, because I know in parts of Europe it's sort of more like an employment post. Yeah,
and you know, and I mean, we were talking before we started about the different contexts, like doing a PhD in a research centre, such as where you're located, or in a sort of more traditional academic department, like where I'm located, and how that can position HDR researchers differently too. And I think there are particular challenges. For example, if you've been an undergraduate student and an honours student basically in that department, and you stay in that department and you become an HDR student or researcher, I think that can be a difficult transition sometimes, because that student role tends to, sort of hang around, as it were.
That's really interesting, because I guess people travel all sorts of journeys to get to the sort of institution that they're at. Before we get onto some of that, I guess I'm curious, like, what do supervisors do? I mean, there's often a lot of focus on what the PhD student does, or candidate, or HDR. But what does being a supervisor look like from your end?
Kiran, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll give it a crack. So for me, I guess I feel like we're pragmatic advisors, and sometimes that's actually it's about advising and developing a project that's feasible within the PhD timeframe and that plays to the students' strengths and interests, which involves keeping the project on track. Sometimes it feels a bit like you're a project manager, which I just, I find that I don't love that role, but maybe it's useful for students at various points in their candidature when things are going awry, or they're struggling, or their motivation is dwindling. Also helping a student rein it in when it becomes unwieldy. I know often we all have these wonderful ideas and it's like all these different rabbit warrens that we want to go down. And I think a good supervisor will be able to say, those are all really interesting ideas, but let's navigate this and negotiate something that's feasible, a project that's feasible. And I guess not close off, but scope the project so that it's manageable and feasible. But it does take quite a lot of time. And I don't know that, it obviously depends on the supervision arrangements and where the student is at in their journey. So I guess as a principal supervisor might devote more time than an associate supervisor, because they would be taking carriage of the supervision. And it's also a journey that, as you would all know, has peaks and troughs. So it can involve more intensive supervision and then less intensive supervision, like just before a milestone, you might be meeting really regularly. But I would say it takes a fair bit of time because you have to comment on draft work. You need to meet regularly with your student or candidates, researchers, and check in when things go awry, supporting them with ethics applications. And I know that university metrics have a kind of average measure that you're allocated for each year for PhD supervision as part of our workload models. I can't remember what that time allocation is. I find it it's not really my cup of tea. And Helen might have more insight on how these measures are arrived at. But I'm pretty sure that supervisors put in more time than they're allocated in terms of institutional metrics. But I guess as a student, I didn't know that. I had no insight into that. And into what it meant, but what the difference was between a principal and associate supervisor. So I guess I just mention it, not to say that it's not worth it. For me, it's totally worth it. It's one of the best parts of my job. I love supervising.
Thanks, Kiran. Yeah, I know. I think that's important to think about the context in which supervision takes place. So it's a serious commitment, of time over a significant length of time. But the other thing is it is part of my job, or it's part of our job. So if we take on a student, then certain responsibilities and obligations are attached to that role. And I think it's important to remember that. So my comments would be similar to Kiran. So I guess I think of three different elements generally. First is the intellectual interlocutor role that Kiran's already mentioned. So that's focusing on the work, exploring ideas, helping students locate their work in the field, I think is a really kind of key part of that. So that's sort of the intellectual interlocutor. Then I think you're a guide through the process of successfully completing a PhD. And I think the difference here is that PhD students or candidates hopefully only do this once. As a supervisor, you have seen it happen more than once, multiple times, and therefore you can be reassuring and say, it's normal to have troughs, as Kiran says, or here's a common thing that often happens around this time. So that sort of guidance I think can be important. And then Kiran's already mentioned the pastoral aspect, and I see this as providing a kind of context of support. And to me, it's important that this is not a therapeutic relationship, but it is one that's supportive. And Kiran used the term cheerleader, which I hadn't thought of. I quite like it. This idea that I'm someone who thinks your work is important and interesting and valuable. And even if you're suffering from very low motivation, I'm going to try and keep you thinking about why this is worth it. There are other people who are interested in this work and invested in it, not overly invested. And I think it's within that context of general support and sort of advocacy and allyship, I guess, that you can make constructive criticism. So I don't see criticism as the opposite of support. I actually think it's support that makes it possible to then be able to have the more difficult conversations. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
So, and just a quick question as well. Why aside from it being kind of part of your role, why do people supervise? Is it just replicating academia, or is it, yeah?
It's extremely rewarding. I mean, it is, as Kiran said, it's one of the very best parts of the job. To me, this is what it is to be in a, to be part of a university, to be part of an intellectual community, is to train and guide, early career researchers. And as the universities become more and more corporatized, and as undergraduate teaching, loses some of its features of autonomy, I sometimes feel like the encounters that I have with graduate students and researchers, and the process of supervision, that's to me, that ends up being the real pure space of kind of intellectual conversation and actually thinking about ideas. And as Kiran says, this is a great way of staying up to date with the research. Often you don't have time. I mean, research students can be super useful because they will read books and then come and tell you about the books and, give you the kind of 3 key points about the book. And so, it's a really incredibly exciting and rewarding process.
Yeah, I would echo Helen. It really is the best part of my job. I love it. I find that you're getting to shape a cutting edge piece of research. It's often cutting edge and it's in exciting areas, and it might be taking risks that for a host of institutional reasons you might not be able to take in your own work related to grant conditions or whatever the case is. So often it's just you're having this really exciting, stimulating intellectual conversation, and you're getting to induct a new scholar into the world of independent research. And I just think I feel so privileged to be able to do that. And to see someone develop as a researcher is just really rewarding. And this might sound aspirational and perhaps too optimistic, but I think as a supervisor, and this really goes to the heart of sociology, you get to instill the value of research to make a difference in our fractured worlds. And for me, that's an amazing thing to be able to do, particularly in the context in which we're currently living with the pandemic unfolding and the corporatization of the university. As Helen said, it feels like it's one of the last remaining spaces where you get to foster that really rich dialogue and research that has the capacity to make a difference without all of those cross-cutting constraints. So yeah, that would be my response, largely just echoing Helen, really.
I just to add something, I mean, sometimes I have taken over supervision of a project, of a research student, because maybe the previous supervisory relationship has broken down, or there's been some sort of difficulty, or the supervisor's left the university. So there are different models of this. Sometimes you do it just to kind of help, to help out your department or the student or your colleagues. Not everything fits one model here.
Yeah, I think that's important to mention, because probably my vision was a bit, one of the optimistic ones, but there are obviously other reasons why we do it. And sometimes it is just about being collegiate.
Yeah, so, even if it's not an ideal relationship, i.e. you haven't chosen each other, you sort of ended up together for not the most, not necessarily intellectual reasons, but those things can still work really well, So I think, pragmatism is kind of important as well as aspiration. The two are important together.
Absolutely. Can I just add one final point on that? Because I think Helen's raised the point that I didn't know I did a master's before my PhD, and that involved a change of supervision, which was gut-wrenching and really destabilized me. And I just want to say that happens, and it's okay, and it doesn't need to mark the end of your project, whatever it is, master's or PhD. It's normal, it happens, and it's also not a kind of judgment on you as a candidate or on the supervisor, because I think part of this is also just about we're human, and sometimes the relationships don't work out for whatever reason, and those reasons might be external factors. And then you need to take on, or a student needs to find another supervisor. So I say it because I didn't know that it was actually quite commonplace. And for me, I remember thinking that it was a reflection on me as a student and that I'd failed. So I'm putting it out there in case others might resonate with the experience of others.
I mean, sometimes it is a judgment on the supervisor, let's be frank, but not always.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's so interesting. I mean, I was feeling really inspired by Kiran's points before, but there is also that pragmatic side to it. And I guess that's sort of what I want to turn to now. I mean, what are the kind of basic ingredients that sort of make a successful or a functional supervision relationship?
Shall I first on this one?
All right, okay. So, well, I think, trust and respect and good communication, but those things take time to develop. So I think that the basic ingredients actually change over time. So, I mean, Kiran already mentioned that this is a journey, or, that the relationship that you have at the start is not the same as the end. So both partners need to be thinking about those changes. And sort of be adaptable and flexible to those changes. What else? Oh, the other thing that I mean, I don't know if it's a specific response to this, but I do think that having other people who are involved not in the specific relationship, but an HDR convener, other academics in the department, more senior students or students who are later on in their candidature. So bringing those ingredients kind of into the relationship so that it's not just this very sort of isolated two-person partnership. That's really important. But, ultimately, I guess a successful supervision is one that ends with the submission of a good enough thesis without destroying anyone's mental or physical health. So, that's to me the kind of goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't. A
good enough thesis, not a perfect thesis.
Yes, yeah. And I when you said that, Helen, it makes me think of that excellent paper that is so often circulated that it's not a Nobel Prize, it's a PhD thesis. I can't remember who wrote it, but I do recommend it. It was a really good salutary reminder to me during my PhD that I'm really just polishing this tiny grain of sand and it just needs to be good enough. But maybe just more sort of pragmatically or kind of prosaically for me, it's about agreeing on a clear set of expectations. And I would agree totally with what Helen said. But at the start, I think a supervisor and researcher need to agree on the terms of engagement. And this includes things like how often you'll meet, what each of your expectations are, turnaround time on work, who will be responsible for scheduling meetings, who will keep a record of what's discussed. I know Deakin has a very extensive candidature engagement form to kind of formalize this, and I think it's useful, and it sets out, the responsibilities of the supervisor and the team as a whole. But again, as Helen said, I do think there should be some flexibility on this because it's a journey. For some people, it might be 3 years, it might extend beyond 3 years. So being flexible and being open to renegotiating those, I think, is helpful. But knowing what the expectations are on both sides is useful because, neither, the student nor the supervisors are mind readers. So it's useful to actually have these discussions. And then, I do think there's that intangible aspect that's about the dynamics or chemistry between the student and supervisor. And I don't know how to kind of capture that in words, but it's things like, is there a rapport, or do you vibe together? Like, do you gel? Do you kind of work together? And that could be a process where you have to figure things out. Certainly that's been my experience on both ends as a supervisor and a student. But also asking questions about, do you share similar intellectual commitments, or at least ones that are workable together? And given the students' aspirations, I often ask myself, am I the right person to supervise them in terms of providing access to scholarly networks? Like if they want to situate themselves in feminist sociology, am I the right person, or is there someone who might be better placed to supervise them given their aspirations? So I guess those would be some of the things that I would say are important for a successful relationship.
Yeah, I think that notion of being clear about your expectations. I know that that's a common thing, and I mean ANU has a similar kind of worksheet that you're supposed to do together. I guess I'm a little bit skeptical about those worksheets. I mean, I think that can be a useful starter for a conversation. I think it's hard when you're a brand new PhD student to know what your expectations are and to know what reasonable expectation, I think it presumes a certain equality, which isn't there, especially at the start. So, I mean, I don't know what the solution to that is. Like, I think sort of setting out, sort of modeling a kind of open communication relationship. So sort of making it clear that you're there to talk about things together and be collaborative. But I think it's hard to know what your expectations are,
Yeah, absolutely. And also it does, I should add, it assumes shared cultural norms, which wasn't my experience as an internationalist student. Those kind of conversations were really hard for me, and are not part of my kind of the cultural norms that I grew up with. So it does make a whole lot of assumptions, but maybe it is, as Helen said, about modeling an open communication style, and also being flexible and saying, let's figure out what's workable for us. It's a starting point, but I wouldn't follow them to the letter. And I also think it assumes a level of academic literacy and an ability to be able to articulate your expectations. And I don't know that I could do that if you asked me. So reflecting on it, Helen, that's a fair point. So maybe it's a starting point, but it's definitely, I would tweak it in line with the researcher and the supervisor in terms of what works for them.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was just reflecting then, like when I started my candidature, I wasn't even sure, like, am I emailing my supervisors too much? Like, is it just to, contact them and leave it with them to decide when they want to respond? Or am I only supposed to sort of like talk to them in this kind of structured environment? Like, it's even just those little intricacies. And I think, Kiran, you were just sort of getting onto this next question, which is around kind of navigating those cultural differences, because sometimes it's just the academic institution, but other times it's even, you might be a student who's worked in a university in another country and then come to Australia, and the kind of academic culture is very different in terms of cross-cultural differences. So how do you sort of navigate that?
Well, shall I go?
Yes, go, Kiran.
I came to Australia as an international student. I did my undergrad and my postgrad and my master's in South Africa. And I had lectured in South Africa, and I had a very different, I guess I thought there were a lot more cultural similarities between kind of Australian Western culture and South African, the kind of academic space in South Africa, and it turned out not to be the case at all. And I remember experiencing quite, not severe, but a strong sense of culture shock. And that was not only in relation to being at uni, but in all sorts of areas of my life, figuring out how Australian culture works. Even small things like when I remember going to a cafe and thinking, I don't know if I'm supposed to go up to the counter to order or if they'll come to me. Those norms were never clear to me. But in terms of the supervision relationship, I remember erring on the side of being really formal, and it took me a long time to get used to being able to say not Professor Keane, but Helen. If I was addressing Helen, that's not how I would do it at home or in my country of origin. And so I think I probably still err on the side of formality, and that might be really alienating for people. But I guess those culturally ingrained norms are hard to break. So maybe just as a supervisor and as a student, being aware that you might have different expectations and communication styles, and trying to work together to cooperatively figure out what those might be and how you can navigate that. I don't have any great tips on how you do that. I just followed my supervisor's lead because I was like a fish out of water. So I just wanted to see, well, what do they do? And they signed off with their first names. So I just followed suit.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful and interesting reflection, Kiran. I mean, I think maybe one thing that can be helpful is to spend time together and do things together that's not specifically about supervision of the project. So, and this works best if you're in, you're lucky enough to be in a location that does have an intellectual community that does things together, seminars, go to seminars together, go to conferences together in the days when we used to go to conferences together, maybe plan events together, or write articles together, or just, I think, doing things together, sort of showing, not telling, about how to navigate this strange and rather peculiar and specific culture that we have in universities, that I think often the expectations and norms aren't articulated. And the other thing I think is to maybe this is really boring for my students, I don't know, but I do tend to talk a bit about what I'm doing other than just working with them. So I'll talk about if I'm reviewing ARC grants, or if I'm trying to write a grant, or if I'm doing referees for promotion applications, or I'm sitting on a promotion committee, or, so just giving a sense of all the other things that are going on that I'm participating in. And to me, that's not just about sort of communicating information or advice. It's about saying that these are things that we can talk about in our relationship. So if you've got questions about any of these things, you can raise them, and I'm happy to talk about them.
That's such a good point, Helen, and I've found that really useful during my PhD. Like, as I sort of have questions about how things sort of work, I often sit down with just one of my supervisors during some of our sessions and just ask about some of those processes, like, when do people become an editor of a journal? How do they do that? Why do they do that?
Yes, yeah, exactly. What's the difference? Yeah, what's the difference between a lecturer and a senior lecturer? Or, why people are saying, the whole publication process actually is really mystifying. And I mean, it is a peculiar process. And so, talking about that and the high rates of rejection, actually, things like this, you don't want to be too bleak. You have to be careful not to just, this kind of narrative of sort of despair. You want to prevent that. But I think those kinds of conversations are really, even they seem inconsequential sometimes, but I think they're nice because they're not so focused on the individual student in a way. I think that can be a relief sometimes, to not just constantly be talking about your own work and your own project and how you're doing.
Yeah, and I think it models for the student all the other things that you do as an academic, and for those who might be interested in pursuing an academic career, it gives them a sense of what they might expect. And yeah, as Helen said, it takes the heat off the student for a bit, because it's not just focused on their project solely.
So I just want to acknowledge we've got some great questions in the chat, which we'll get
cool.
to. There's just a few more questions I want to ask. So I just wanted to ask a bit just about, I guess, some of the boundaries in the relationship. So sometimes that's between personal and professional life, or sometimes you're working on projects, or you're teaching a course that your supervisor convenes. So how do you sort of manage some of those different relationships and boundaries?
Me or you, Kiran?
Go first with this one, Helen, because I'm really interested to hear what you have.
I think this is really hard. I think this is one of the hardest things to talk about and to manage, because it is, I mean, like I started with, it's a kind of unique relationship. So, at one extreme, you have sort of cold indifference, and that's really terrible. Then you have kind of intimacy and over-involvement, and that's terrible as well. So you're trying to manage some sort of space in between. And I know that supervisors have quite different, I think there's a range of kind of, reasonable practices in relation to that personal professional divide. And I know that people often say, don't be friends with your students or with people you're supervising, but I have been reflecting on this, and I actually like friendship as a model for supervision, because I think that there's a huge range of different types of friendship. So I'm not saying it's like, your BFF or whatever, but I do think the idea of a work-based friendship can be quite a positive model, with the recognition that it's a friendship that is structured around the development of the student's research. So it's a friendship with a specific a specific goal. So I'd be interested to hear what people think about that, because I know that it goes against the mantra, which is don't be friends with your students. It's hard not to become friends with someone when you're involved in this kind of intellectual collaboration. Like, I can't help it. I just, you know, you get excited, you're doing exciting, amazing things together. So it's hard to sort of not to develop some form of friendship. And the other thing, just to revert back to a point we've already made, I think joint supervision and co-supervision, something that's happening in our school is we're moving much more towards, we've always had panels, but they've never really been operating very actively, but we're moving much towards a sort of co-supervision model. And I think that can be really, really helpful with the management of boundaries. But I'll leave it there, and I'm curious to see what Kiran's thoughts are.
I'm so glad you raised the question of friendship, because I think I would agree, Helen, and I think it's interesting that we tend, I suppose it's a reflection of the division between personal and professional, and, you know, that strict bifurcation, which obviously doesn't hold, like it's not tenable. And I like to think about the affordances of friendship. But as Helen said, you know, within the remit of the supervision relationship, because being too chummy with your student, I also think can have drawbacks or pose particular challenges. So I like the idea of a friendship within the remit of the supervision relationship, and with the goal of the student's project and,
Exactly.
and their ultimate submission in mind. So if the friendship is not really in the service of that, then I think, yeah, it might need to be renegotiated. So I think Helen's idea of a friendship, like broadly and capaciously conceived, rather than how we might think of a friendship as in my BFF. Yeah, I really like that idea. And I guess I think in terms of collaborating with students, that can be really enriching, and it can be beneficial for both the student and the supervisor, just so long as the student is receiving fair recognition or payment for their work. So if in the case of RA work or teaching, they should be paid for it. And of course, the supervisor shouldn't take credit where it's not due or rely on the student to do unpaid work. And there are, of course, clear guidelines on this in terms of publishing and co-authorship. But I think one of the challenges that we forget sometimes, and Helen's mentioned this, is that there is a power dynamic between the student and the supervisor. So it's really, often students are reluctant to follow the formal process. But when, I guess for me, I think it's important to remember that including HDR students as co-authors is good for both of you. It's good for the student and the supervisor. For students, it gives them recognition from their peers and the wider scholarly community. It can be crucial for employability prospects. And also for supervisors, co-authorship demonstrates the kind of support and professional training that is well regarded internally in promotion processes and in external grant applications. But I guess over and above all of that, I just think that being a fair and generous collaborator is a good thing to do. So yeah, that would be my response in terms of collaboration. But again, it's something that you would want to negotiate in the individual relationships, and co-supervision can be really valuable in navigating these challenges and the complexities, particularly when, and I'm in the situation when you're paired with a more experienced, seasoned supervisor, and under a kind of apprenticeship model, the less experienced supervisor is in training, if you like, or they're learning. That can be really useful to kind of bounce ideas off the more seasoned supervisor and figure out the best way forward in the best interests of the student and their project.
Great, fantastic. I'm going to move into some of the questions that people have, and just because we were just on that point, Dorinda's just asked, Helen, can you expand a bit on the panel style of supervision as opposed to co-supervision?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, well, I mean, different universities have different setups, but at ANU, you have to have a panel of three, minimum of three supervisors, but one is designated the primary supervisor, and usually also the chair of the panel, although that role is sometimes split up. And then there's two associate supervisors. And in my experience, that's extremely variable, the level of involvement of those two associate supervisors. I mean, and I think historically at ANU, the level of involvement's been pretty low, and they've usually just been brought in maybe for a specific chapter, or, you know, so some of them really would only meet the student twice during their candidature. And that's not a criticism, because I've been that kind of associate supervisor. I've been on a lot of panels where I really haven't been that involved. But I think more recently, it's been recognised the limitations of that kind of model. So now in our school, we have a lot more of co-supervision, where the student will have two equal supervisors, really, and they will meet together, all together. And, you know, that's a sort of really a more genuine co-supervision. Another model that's just started in our school is two students who've started and they're working on similar topics. They're both co-supervised by two academics, one senior, one more junior, and the four of them are meeting together. Now, I think that eventually the idea is that they won't all be meeting together, but at the start of the process, for the first 6 months or so, they're meeting as a group. And so far that's been really successful, actually. So I think there are, you know, different approaches to this.
And it is interesting because I think different disciplines also have quite different structures. Like people in the sciences and the lab model are usually working with their supervisor day to day, whereas in the social sciences and humanities, it's a bit more distance, or you're working on quite different projects within the related discipline.
Yeah.
There's a question that was just sent to me privately. It's not anonymous, but they just directly messaged from Adele. So they've said, it's great to hear that supervision is about being supporters with cheerleading and critical feedback, but what if it turns out that the supervisor and student have different values and value hierarchies in their approach to the project, but the supervision relationship's working well otherwise? So for example, differences in abolition or decriminalization versus working within the criminal justice system.
Oh,
gosh,
interesting question.
That is a good question.
Yeah.
So what the idea is, the supervision relationship is working well on a number of fronts, but there are key differences in value hierarchies. Well, I guess I would say that in a way it depends how crucial those are to the actual shape of the project, and if they're non-negotiables. I mean, you know, deal breakers or something. I guess if there's like I was asked to be involved in the supervision of a student, and the project was around, well, I'll just say reproductive rights. And I realized that I couldn't be involved in that project because a very sort of core commitment of mine would not be consistent with the approach that was being taken in that project. And actually, I've had a couple of things around drugs which are related to that as well. But those are right on the extreme. Like those are really, you know, sort of they're my non-negotiables. So even if I really, you know, engage with that student on a sort of personal level, I don't think I would be the right supervisor for that. So I think it's hard to say in an abstract sense. I would want to look at how core is that disagreement to the actual project. I know, what do you think, Kiran?
Yeah, I agree, Helen. And I guess if the answer is that it's not a deal breaker, Adele, and it's not core to the kind of project and the development of the project, and it's not going to lead to like conflict or a kind of breakdown or foreseeable conflict, then I would say, so long as the student, let's say they've got very different ontological or epistemological commitments or values, so long as they can defend those in the thesis. And actually, it could be a really rich site, because if the supervisor has a different view, the process of having to defend or prosecute their argument could actually shore up the argument of the thesis. It could really bolster it and make it watertight. So it could be a really productive avenue. Not always, but I guess it, as Helen said, it depends if it's a deal breaker. But sometimes we think of these varying commitments or diverse views as problematic, but I think that they can be really generative within the right constraints. Like, so they can really help the student and the supervisor together to jointly construct a really solid argument and prosecute that and defend it, particularly if the student has to, preempt those critiques or argue their case. But that said, it could also, I can see it, like as Helen was saying, where it might just evolve and not really advance the thesis. So I don't think I could answer that in the abstract. It's probably.
I think that's a great response, Kiran. And I do think quite firmly that it's not our job to replicate ourselves. So, I do think that as supervisors, it's really important for us to recognize that there are a whole bunch of ways to do a particular project. And we all have effective attachments to particular theoretical frameworks and, frameworks that we love and we're passionate about. But they're never the only way to do something. So to me, there's a difference between a kind of, the project is being done not in the way that I would do it if it was my project. Well, it's not my project, so that's okay. So the sort of deal breaker situation I'm talking about is a bit distinct from that. The other thing that, in a more practical level, if you find that you have a really great relationship with someone, but there is a sort of deep, profound social, political, intellectual disagreement. I'm finding it hard to sort of imagine that, but perhaps that person could take on a different role in the supervision. So they could be a kind of general supporter or guide, or they could help you through the milestones or something, and someone else take over. This is actually what happened with the example that I mentioned, that I did remain involved in that, but I wasn't the primary supervisor, but I was able to sort of help the student with some other things. So.
Great, that's so useful. And that was also a great question as well.
Yeah, very good question.
Yeah. So Tico has another great question. In the context of multidisciplinary supervision teams, how should the PhD student navigate feedback that might be coming from quite different positionalities and disciplines? And Tico, I don't know if you want to jump on if you have a specific example or you're just thinking that in the abstract.
Well, I suppose, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So for example, like in the public health or like health, you got sociologists, but you also got people coming from a professional background, but then you also got the community driven sort of people. And then there's also people, probably the previous experience much more about international development as well. All of these usually have a very different, we are all working for community, but just the way we believe we can achieve that outcome might be slightly different from one to another. So I thought that's interesting.
I'm really curious to hear Helen's insights, because I've experienced this, and my limited experience, it ended up being it didn't work out as a multidisciplinary team, and so I'd love to know. Obviously, that's particular to that situation and that case, yes. But how can you make it work?
I think this is a very difficult situation, and I think for students, I think it's one of the hardest things when they get when they receive conflicting advice and people are trying to pull them in one way or the other. I think the team, it's important that the team has meetings outside of meeting with the student to work out what is the primary location of this work, so is it primarily, so I guess this is in a way saying something a bit provocative, which is, that there can't be multidisciplinary work. I think there can be, but I guess I think from the student's perspective, it's really important that there's some clarity about, well, who is going to examine this? I guess that's to turn around on its head. It's like, well, who are the examiners for this? And therefore, if those are the examiners, what is the primary kind of orientation of this work? And therefore, that means that some supervisors, are going to provide input, but that should be fed through a particular person who gets to say that this is the actual feedback. Sorry, that was an incredibly inarticulate response. But what I'm saying is that I think the supervisory team needs to work out what the primary kind of orientation is. And if I'm involved in something like this, sometimes I'll be the sociologist on a much more practice-based or policy-based project. And I always say, I'm going to give you this feedback, but that's from my perspective as a sociologist. You should take on what works, you should reject what doesn't work, and I will always defer to your primary supervisor or your primary co-supervisors or something like that. I don't know if, is that helpful at all?
Yeah, it's very helpful, and I really like, again, that you're coming back to that kind of pragmatic goals about who's very likely going to be the examiners, because I think we all just want to pass the PhD, get it all done, and move on.
I think the question of who is, if you're not sure, sometimes it's not clear whether something is a public health project or a sociology project. And I think even if you think about hypothetically, who do you think is going to be reading this? Who is this addressed to? What are the journals you're going to try and get published in? Who was likely to be the examiner? That clarifies what the primary orientation is. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would echo Helen. I think it is the responsibility of the supervisors to work constructively in the best interests of the student. So in the case I mentioned, we met as a team, just the supervisors across the different disciplines, because we were pulling in different directions. And I think, as you were saying, Tico, it's very destabilizing and confusing for the student to be given conflicting advice. And so we met externally to decide on a way forward that would best serve the projects with in mind, that the students' intellectual commitments and the orientation of the work.
Perfect. And I think it answers another question that I had also sort of posed in our brief, which was something around, like whose PhD is it at the end of the day, like who makes those final decisions, and that's always a bit murky sometimes. I think it depends on the stage and what the kind of agreements are about decision making. But I just want to move on to another question. So Annie's asked, how much pressure do scholars feel to take on PhD students or to have PhD students complete, given that it's kind of about, sometimes in terms of like being promoted? That's
you want to answer that one, Kiran?
Well, as an early to mid-career researcher, I do feel pressure. It's important for my development, but also I guess I don't like to think of it as pressure because I enjoy it. I really do, but there are institutional constraints and pressures that maybe students aren't aware of, that we do need timely completions, and we do get assessed on that in our performance reviews with the increasing neoliberalization of the university. So those are constraints within which we're all working, and yeah, it can be challenging, but for me, I enjoy it. So, and I want to get the experience. I think one of the challenges that some early and mid-career scholars face is that on the one hand, we want to get the experience, and often we need it in order to get accredited as a supervisor. So you may not know this, but increasingly universities expect you to jump through various hoops in order to get accredited, which I think is good. It protects the students and ensures that supervisors are adequately trained. But on the other hand, it can be quite frustrating that in the same stroke, in the same gesture, they put in place obstacles that make it very hard for us. So, for example, if you're on a fixed term contract, as I am, and your contract doesn't extend beyond the candidature of the student, then you're not eligible to supervise. So sometimes it's about pushing back and having those discussions. But those are some of the kind of bureaucratic, or maybe I should just say institutional barriers and challenges that we confront. Certainly from my perspective as an early and mid-career scholar, between these two, we want to get accredited, we want to get the experience, but then there are institutional and policy barriers that make it quite hard to do that.
Yeah, no, that's also true, Kiran. And I guess for me, I feel that I'm in a really extraordinarily privileged position. I know, I complain constantly, like many of us do, but actually, I have a continuing position and I've been promoted to professor. So I don't feel I'm not subject to those same acute pressures as Kiran is, but I want to contribute by supervising students, so I do feel pressure to take students on, and I want them to complete in a timely fashion, partly because the university says we have to, but also because I think that's the best outcome for the student. I really think, especially in the current sort of circumstances that we're in, these kind of long, drawn out, extended candidatures are really, really destructive. And that I think we know now that after a certain time it gets harder and harder to finish. So because once you come out of your scholarship or whatever, then you have to take on more work. So I think really trying to avoid that is important. And in terms of, it's an interesting question about the pressures of the institution and the neoliberal university, because I do see, and acknowledging my privileged position, I do see part of my role is to act as a little bit of a fire door or something against some of those pressures. So I do want students to complete on time, but I don't want to kind of infect them with the kind of I don't know, the sort of rushed and kind of overproductive kind of cult that's currently dominating universities. I mean, I do feel like the PhD process is this really precious time that in some way, if we can, we should try and protect. We should protect that space from that kind of incredibly instrumentalized approach to everything. So yeah.
Oh, that's so important. That's so interesting. We've just got a couple of minutes left, so I guess I just want to maybe just give Helen and Kiran an opportunity just to maybe just, I think Dorinda sort of asked, you have a concrete example of things that students can do to positively build the relationship. So I wonder if you just have like one take-home message to kind of have hopefully a good supervision relationship, what would be the one thing you would emphasize?
Kiran, you go first.
Oh, that is so tricky, Dorinda.
Doesn't have to be everything, but just one little.
To crystallize it all into one thing. Oh, gee.
I can jump in if you like.
Don't disappear. Stay, communicate.
Yeah, communicate. That's a great one, actually.
I know I think when things aren't going well and you feel bad about yourself and you're struggling, and it's absolute human nature to isolate and to not reach out, because you're trying to. I understand it. You're trying to maintain face, and this is a person that you want to impress, and so you will see students often withdraw and kind of disappear, and I would just say, I know it's hard, but to just stay in contact, to communicate, to send an email, to knock on the door or whatever. I really think that's a kind of important thing.
Yeah, I would just echo that, Helen. And it helps us remember or keep in touch and know where you're at. And sometimes that can be a catalyst to saying, okay, you're struggling. Let's just meet and touch base and have a chat and see where you're at. Even if you don't have anything concrete to show me, that let's have a chat and touch base.
Yes. I'm a big fan of the 10-minute meeting. Not every meeting has to be an hour and a half of deep, engaged intellectual discussion. You might just want to say, let's just have 10 minutes and it's because it's harder now, we're all on Zoom and everything, right? But, let's just check in for 10 minutes and see how you're going. And those little short, low stakes meetings can be really valuable.
Great. I think that's a fantastic point to finish on, and I want to thank you again both so much, Helen and Kiran. That was a really
thank you, discussion. Anthony. So
thanks,
great
Anthony.
of you to organise this, and really lovely and brilliant questions. And best of luck to everyone in their supervising and being supervised endeavours.
Absolutely. Best of luck, and thank you so much, Anthony, for organising, and to Helen for sharing her insights.
So nice to see you.
This was so nice to such a great session. Thank you.
And thanks everyone for joining. We'll have another session to be determined at the start of October, and then we've also got the TASA thematic week at the end of November, and we'll have some specific postgrad events, I think, on the Monday of that week, which we're still detailing. So thanks everyone for joining, and have a lovely day.
Have a nice afternoon.
Have a great afternoon. Thank you.